Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on FSCON reform from the perspective of labor. I'm Rinaldi, a policy analyst here at INO. As you know, INO has just released our new report on the subject, Time to Reform, Delivering Modern Air Traffic Control. Joining me today to discuss the subject are former Senator Byron Dorgan, one of the co-chairs of the INO Aviation Working Group that produced the report, and Paul Rinaldi from NATCA, one of the members of the working group. Before I give the floor to Senator Dorgan, who's going to moderate the call, let me just inform you that you can send your questions at all times via the comment feature on your GoToWebinar. After Paul speaks, we'll address those questions. Senator?
Well, Rui, thank you very much. This is Senator Byron Dorgan, and today we're going to talk about air traffic control. Right now, there's about 5,000 airplanes in the air over the U.S., and today there will have been about 87,000 flights. And guiding those airplanes and those flights are about 10,000 air traffic controllers using ground-based radar guidance. But that's World War II technology, and yet we're still using it. Newer and better technology is available with satellite guidance, and it's called NextGen. It's more accurate, more direct routes, saves time for passengers, better margins of safety. But the fact is, our country is slow to adopt to this new technology. So we're going to talk about that. And to talk with us about that today and the air traffic reform proposals before the Congress is Paul Rinaldi, the president of the National Association of Air Traffic Controllers. So Paul, thank you very much. And why don't you tell us how you see all of these challenges in front of us?
Thank you, Senator. It's no secret that our status quo is unacceptable with unpredictable stop-and-go funding, short-term extensions of FAA reauthorization, sequester, furloughs, constant threats of shutdown, and now new threats of shrinking resources and budget. We cannot sustain a robust aviation system that we have today in the future if we don't fix the status quo. Under status quo with unreliable funding, we have less of an aviation system for this country. We'll fall further behind in modernization, and we will never get a chance to replace our aging infrastructure. A good example of this is space-based ADS-B. Rockets are being launched this year, and there is 13 satellites up there now to give us full global surveillance. And one satellite is giving us just some feedback right now, and it's working. The FAA is struggling to get on board with this technology because of lack of funding. And in order to get on board with this technology, they're going to have to look at cutting some important NextGen programs that we're in the middle of if we're going to move forward with space-based ADS-B. And it's just not good for our system where you have to make those tough decisions. Without reliable funding, we won't be able to keep up with today's traffic, never mind the growth that we see coming. With the continued advancement of technologies and the continued pressure to increase capacity, we've got to figure out a different way to do business for our aviation system. The current path is just not sustainable. If you look at today's growth, in 2014, we moved nearly 850 million passengers on commercial flights. 2015, the passenger count rose to 895 million. And then last year, in 2016, we did 928 million. We controlled over, and actually by 2019, we're projected to go over 1 billion passengers. We controlled over 141 million operations in 2016. That's up from 136 million operations in 2013. The capacity and the demand is growing faster than projected. Just recently, the NextGen Advisory Committee, which I sit on, was tasked by the airlines to fix New York. And we're kind of curious of what fix New York is because we are constantly meeting runway capacity at LaGuardia, Kennedy, and Newark. And it's the airline schedule with the tight airspace and the demands of aviation beyond the capacity. It just doesn't fit into the mathematical equation of runway capacity and standard separation. If we could get a mile of runway up in New York, that would help tremendously, but that would be taking away a major interstate highway to actually get a runway at JFK in Newark or LaGuardia. Realizing we're not going to build a runway, it leaves some to say that we need to find a way to do VFR arrival rates within IFR conditions. Of course, that is a concern for safety. And if we were going to do something like that to trim those safety margins, we would need state-of-the-art technology at the controller's position and also in the cockpit to do that properly. That would take a tremendous amount of resources. You know, we run a very safe system, but we certainly don't want to take it for granted. With shrinking budgets and aging infrastructure, our trajectory is not on a good path. The stress on the system is intense and will continue to grow. Boeing and Airbus expected to double the amount of aircraft in the system by 2034. We currently have 750,000 UAVs that are registered in the United States, projected to be 2.7 million registered by the end of 2020. They're not going to be on the ground for long. We have to find a creative, safe way to integrate them into our operation and into our airspace, which is really nothing short of a massive challenge and a vast amount of resources, which right now the FAA just currently doesn't have, and it'll be less under a tighter budget. And if that wasn't enough, we also have the daunting task of meeting the needs of the United States commercial space industry. There's the race to colonize the moon, as we all know, and the demands for airspace from the commercial space industry is becoming astronomical. Last year we had 9 launches and 2 re-entries. Every time we have a launch and a re-entry, we protect thousands of nautical miles of airspace, and we move general aviation, commercial aviation to protect them from the path, and obviously if something would happen, a debris field. If you just look at the forecast, they're looking at doing 50 launches this year. By 2018, 150 launches, and almost a launch every day by 2020. In order to meet this demand, we're going to need some real-time forecasting, weather, winds, to protect the airspace appropriately, but also be able to run the amount of air traffic we need to do that. Our controller staffing is still at an all-time low. In 2013, under sequester, the FAA stopped hiring, and in 2014, the FAA decided to change the hiring process, and actually in the process, it broke, and it sputtered along. Through some congressional interventions, we believe we're right on track and starting to hire, but it's going to take years to get our staffing back to an appropriate level. I mean, that's proof that you just can't fix things in the national airspace overnight. You actually have to plan. 2016 was an amazing year, another amazing year for aviation in this country. Commercial aviation has never been safer, and it's without argument that we're in the safest time in commercial aviation history. The work that the controllers and the pilots do every day is kind of making it routine and boring, that the system is just so safe. It's an accomplishment we all should be proud of, and it's a lot of work and a lot of resources have gone in over the last 8 years to build this robust culture of safety. And with the cornerstones of collaboration and communication and reporting and professionalism, we're at an all-time high in safety. But as good as we are, it's not time to rest on our accomplishments of yesterday. It's certainly not time to let complacency set in, and it's certainly not time to think we're good enough as an aviation system. We need a reliable funding stream, and we have streamlined requirements and procurement process to get modern technology to our controllers to meet the demands of the skies above. If we don't, we won't be able to keep up, and these merging industries of UAV and commercial space might have to leave the United States, and we will lose thousands of well-paid jobs because we can't adapt to the needs of the industry. Now's the time for us to adapt. Now's the time to look at this aviation system and to try to protect it and continue to grow and continue to be the gold standard around the world.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. And we want to remind those on the webinar to send in questions if they have questions, and we will begin asking those questions. And Paul, the first question is, I know last year there was a proposal in Congress to create a government chartered nonprofit organization that would then be the air traffic control organization, with presumably predictable funding and the ability to make investments to better move towards the next generation satellite guidance. That was a proposal I believe NATCA had supported. Is your view of that proposal the same as it was last year? And recognizing there is not now a proposal, but there's expected to be some proposals in Congress on that subject. Do you believe that approach could provide the kind of assurance you need and the funding you need to move towards this new technology?
We believe, and we supported the AIR Act that the Chairman Schuster put out, because it met the principles of giving us a stable, predictable funding stream, protecting the workforce, keeping them whole, so that, you know, we have this philosophy that the workforce keeps the system running. So as long as you keep the workforce whole, we're going to keep the system running. Gave us the ability to be dynamic with modernization, and we thought it met those principles, and met our guiding principles, and it really concentrated on continuing to have a very diverse system around rural America, and protecting what we hold near and dear is the general aviation community. So we thought it was a positive there, and we supported it. Now, will we support the next bill that comes out of Congress? It really depends on the provisions that lie within. We've been pretty vocal that we will not support a for-profit model. We think that that puts up more hurdles than what we're dealing with today. And that status quo is not acceptable. We need stable, predictable funding. The Aviation Trust Fund is bringing in a good balance, that we're almost running the system on the Aviation Trust Fund alone. So I think that we've got to find a path forward to streamline the process of procurement and requirements of equipment, and getting it, you know, to our facilities on a real-time basis. And at the same time, we have to make sure we're protecting the workers that are on the front line.
But a new proposal that meets the same conditions that NETCA felt important last year would probably garner the same support.
Yes,
going forward.
If it met the same conditions, right, we would support it. Yes.
And here's another question from a listener. How long do you project it would take to transfer the NextGen program to a proposed government-chartered nonprofit? Would that delay the NextGen project?
I'm not sure it would delay it, because during the transition period, the FAA would still be running, and one of the things we would have to have during a transition period is a stable funding stream, so that we can continue to modernize the system while we're continuing to run this robust system. So the actual transferring, I think, will be 3 to 5 years of the whole transferring over from the FAA into a not-for-profit company, if we just use that as the structure, government chartered company. Probably a process of 3 to 5 years is what it would take, but at the same time we would still be running and modernizing at the same time.
The purpose, of course, is developing a new system that accelerates rather than retards the movement towards the NextGen system that works, right?
Well, absolutely. So, but you don't want to stop the progress we're doing today. So you want to keep the system funded. You want to keep everything staffed properly. You want to keep hiring controllers. You want to keep focusing on the growth of the new industries, and you want to focus on the growth of commercial aviation, general aviation, while you're transferring over. And it sounds, I'm making it sound simple. It's going to be a real daunting task, but on the other side of that, we will have a streamlined process where we will be able to do it, more real time.
Another question that's come in is, how would a nonprofit system, government chartered nonprofit organization, help with the controller shortage?
Well, it's a good question. I think the fact, if we can get a stable, predictable funding stream, and we could actually start meeting our hiring goals. My hat's off to the FAA. They met their hiring goals last year for the first time in 7 years, and most of it has been built around tightening budgets, whether it was with sequester or the actual threat of a shutdown, and then you don't go into a shutdown. But when those things happen, when you're actually going into a threat of a shutdown, you start pulling back what you're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because you don't know exactly if Congress is actually going to shut the government down.
A question from a listener: what are the specific worker protections, Paul, that you think are essential in a new proposal?
Well, in essence, is to keep the workers whole, and it's the collective bargaining agreements would come over as is. Your working conditions would come over as is, your pay, your benefits, your health care, your retirement as is, and we would maintain that through your career. And that's exactly what was in the AIR Act, and we supported it because that the controller didn't really have to worry about, or the FAA worker that came over into the new entity didn't really have to worry about what was going to happen. It was really maybe just a change of what's on the pay stub as opposed to what the benefit program is.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to skip back to a previous question that was asked. The question about the shortage of air traffic controllers. Can you describe what kind of a shortage exists and why?
Well, so you don't take a test and become an air traffic controller. You go through a bunch of job jeopardy points even before you could even go to the academy. Medical background check, entrance exams, and then once you get to the academy, it's a vigorous screen. And right now we're seeing about 40 to 50% of some classes coming with a pass grade out of the academy and then going on to their facilities. And depending on the facilities they go to, it could be a 3 to 5 year journey to become a full certified air traffic controller. And that's why it can't be fixed overnight. And it's not a job that everyone can do, and it's a high tense job, and it takes an incredible amount of training to be able to do it on your own.
Can you describe for listeners the issue of the paper strips? There was a story on NBC recently about it, and some others. Tell us about what does it mean when they talk about paper strips?
Well, I actually have a picture for you, which picture's worth 1,000 words, they say, right? So if I put this up there, let's see if it's up there. So this picture of 2 towers. And believe it or not, it's not the same controller with the blonde hair. We have. It looks like she's staged at both towers, but they're 2 different people. And if you look at Las Vegas Tower, there's a milk crate with a whole bunch of plastic strip holders. Mm-hmm. And then she's actually working a position, and she's got them all stacked up, and she's stuffing a piece of paper into, which is a flight plan, into the strip holder, and she's kind of staging them. And then if you look at San Francisco Tower, which if you look out the window, you can see it's kind of soupy out there in San Francisco with some rain. And I'm assuming there was a delay going in because she has all those paper strips kind of lined up on the desk there. And those are our 2 state-of-the-art air traffic control towers, brand new, and both commissioned last year, September and October. Fabulous facilities, except they still have some of our old antiquated equipment. The goal was to have them up and running with our strip program, a prototype in which we were working on for a couple of years, but it just wasn't stable enough for busy facilities like that to do that. Now, if you look at the next slide, I'll show you this wonderful little program that now Canada has, electronic strip program that they've been using roughly since 2002, and selling around the world and creating a revenue stream that way. And it's pretty adaptable. Now, the FAA does have a program which is going to give us electronic flight strips into our control towers, but again, it's all contingent on budgets. Leidos is actually working on it right now, and we saw some of the prototypes, and it looks pretty good, but it all depends on if the funding stream stays alive for that.
I'll go back to some additional questions from listeners, but we face a period in just a very few short weeks where the Congress is going to have to decide whether it extends funding. What is called the continuing resolution expires. If Congress doesn't agree on a new continuing resolution, the government would shut down, right?
That's correct.
And so facing that I think it's just probably 3 weeks from now, a government shutdown has had, you've been through this.
Several times, and several threats of a shutdown.
And tell us the consequences of a shutdown for an air traffic controller and for you who runs the air traffic control organization.
Well, if you look at what happened in 2013 in October, and it was a number of threats of shutdowns leading up to that, but that's when we had our 16-day shutdown. What happens is, as you're leading up to it, within a week, and it looks like this is a real possibility of a shutdown, the FAA starts pulling back on anything that's non-essential, right? So they look at programs as, NextGen technology and any other type of programs they're doing as non-essential, and really going to put all hands on the deck just to run air traffic control to keep the system up and running. So the government may be shut down, but air traffic control is going to show up to work and work their shifts, and then get paid at some time once the government reopens. Now, we went 16 days without pay, a lot of stress on individuals that, you know, didn't get a paycheck or got half a paycheck, and then they missed one payday and paying their gas and their lunch to get to work every day to keep the system up and running. It's just, you know, with a robust aviation system we have, and with the money that's being generated into the aviation trust fund, you would think that there'll be some way to protect us from these shutdowns, so we can continue to grow aviation in this country, not shrink it.
But yeah, I mean, the problem is uncertainty, isn't it?
The uncertainty, and we won't know. So, you know, it's April 28th is the day. So right around, I don't know, April 14th, if it looks like there's going to be the real possibility, the FAA will start planning and pulling back. And what they're doing is a whole lot of pre-planning and not any planning towards the future of the aviation system. They're actually doing planning for a shutdown. And, you know, some years we see this 2 or 3 times, you know, a threat, and on important issues. I mean, we have seen from Syrian refugees to funding of Planned Parenthood, to the funding of the Affordable Care Act, to gun control. All of these issues are important, but not germane to running the safest, most efficient system in the world. And what we need to do is find a way to just protect us and isolate us. And that's why we're willing to sign up for something different than what we have today, because the status quo is just not sustainable.
Well, when this continuing resolution expires towards the end of April, next week the Congress is in session. Then they are out of session for 2 weeks. Then they come back and they have 1 week to try to figure out how do they avoid a shutdown. And I think they probably will avoid a shutdown. I hope they do. But still, it's going to be this brinksmanship, and I know it has an impact on every one of the folks that work in these towers. Yeah. Here's a question from a listener. Would the FAA continue to maintain the academy, or would that training function be transferred to the new government chartered corporation?
That's a good question. I think that eventually it would be transferred over, but a lot of these things need to be, and this is one of the things we wanted in the AIR Act, is really a robust process during a transition to really work through all these issues to make sure that we would be able to have a good structure, a sound structure. If you ask me how it should be, I would think the new entity should certainly be able to run an academy, and with the oversight of the regulatory and safety oversight.
All right, another question from a listener. So given your comments about congressional uncertainty, can you explain specifically the source of funding for a new ATC system, government chartered nonprofit of the type you described? And why would this be an adequate, stable funding stream?
Well, if you look at what the rest of the countries around the world have done, they've gone to pulling out their operation away from the regulatory and safety function, and formed ANSP, Air Navigation Service Provider. And that comes in many shapes and many sizes, from government corporations to quasi-government corporations to not-for-profit corporations and to for-profit models. Each one of them have basically designated a user fee base of weight and distance to generate a funding stream. And if you just look at what the Aviation Trust Fund is bringing in as a funding stream today, I think in 2015, all but 7% was covered by the Aviation Trust Fund. And the fact that it's keeping about $5 to $6 billion in uncommitted in the trust fund, it could almost, as it is today, could fund itself without seeing any increase to users.
Question, how do you expect a new organization running air traffic control would affect the private pilots across the country?
Well, this country is very unique with a robust general aviation system, and I think that one of the things that the AIR Act had was a governance board that actually had general aviation seats on there to protect rural America and private pilots, and that's something that we would support completely, because that's what makes our system unique and robust, is the diversity.
Are there areas in the country where we have, well, I shouldn't, let me ask it a different way. We have areas in the country where there is very substantial congestion, and that affects the amount of traffic that can exist in those regions. But is it also the case that that areas that are more sparsely populated can also have their flights impacted because of weather and other things that change the amount of traffic that can come into a hub airport?
Sure. The biggest impact to aviation, obviously, is the weather phenomenons that you experience, and convective weather for sure. You look at a place like New York. Everyone talks just about the three large ones, but really Teterboro is just as large, and we make that is our general aviation and business aviation hub up there, and there are four major airports very tight together, running a tremendous amount of traffic through the system and doing it very well. But just because some are delayed, it's whether it's weather or whether it's just over scheduling, it's all about safety.
A comment rather than a question. Privatization will not prevent congestion. First of all, we're not talking about privatization here, but I assume he's talking about the proposal for a government chartered nonprofit organization will not prevent congestion.
Well, congestion, and as I said, is runways help congestion. Streamlining airspace would help congestion. But we also have to be very conscious of the communities around the airports with noise, and we've experienced that when we've tried to do some PBN procedures, what we call OAPM, around certain communities, around airports and certain communities, and making sure it doesn't negatively impact the community. So congestion is, when you live close to a busy hub airport, you're going to hear airplanes. I mean, that's just right. That's a fact of life. As far as congestion on taxiways and runways, there's a mathematical equation what it comes up to of a 3-mile separation, 1,000 feet, and one on a runway per time. So there's a mathematical equation. It's time, and you just figure it out and go. If we're oversaturating it, we're going to have congestion. It's just that simple.
But it's also the case, isn't it, that moving towards the new technology, satellite guidance and so on, is more precise. Because it's more precise, there are different spacing requirements, and you're able to relieve congestion just by moving more quickly to the new technology.
Sure. I mean, we've seen some success with that up in New York with the RMP approach to runway 13 at Kennedy, where it gets very close to LaGuardia's airspace, but because we know it's a precision approach and guided that way, that we're able to run those procedures. So if we could do more of that, absolutely. But realizing that we're constrained with the space over Manhattan and certainly over Long Island, there's only so much you can do.
And we have a question from someone who asks, what if nothing happens? What if, Paul, I think you actually alluded to that early on, but Congress is not exactly known for speeding here and making things happen, getting things done. So what if nothing happens? Tell me.
That's a great question, and it's if nothing happens, I think we will start to dwindle as an aviation system in the world. If we're not able to adapt to space-based ADS-B and able to streamline our separation standards over the ocean sectors in which we control in this country, which is the majority of the Pacific Ocean, a good portion of the Caribbean and Atlantic, then another country that could actually adapt to modern procedures might, get the wave and the approval from OCAO to run that airspace, and that would be jobs for us. If nothing happens, we would look at, as they did in 2013, if we don't have enough money to run the system, they looked at closing 238 air traffic control towers, most of them, by the way, rural communities, and shutting them down because there was just not enough money to run the system. If nothing happens, we won't be able to provide for the new entries into the system, and the UAV users will, do their paths and flight paths and journeys and test paths in Canada or somewhere else, and this our commercial space program might actually go away if we're not able to protect the airspace from them. So these are real threats to, you know, the American fabric and the jobs of this country. And you know, our aviation system is an economic engine. 5% of our gross domestic product, 11 million well-paid jobs, $1.3 trillion contributed to our economy from these jobs. It really is. We want to see a robust, growing aviation system. We don't want to cut back and start pulling back aviation because we're because of the bipartisan, or because of the non-getting along in Congress, or because of you know, a new way of looking at federal budgets. I mean, it's a deep concern of ours.
Well, Paul, this is a big issue, reforming and modernizing our air traffic control system. And in some ways it's controversial, but it's unbelievably important. And I think I'd certainly appreciate your leadership and the leadership of the National Association of Air Traffic Controllers and the 928 million people you described as flying this year. All of us, and I've had my share on those airplanes, my share of time, all of us really owe a thanks to controllers all across this country who steer us safely across the skies. It's a great record, and we say thank you to the air traffic controllers. And Paul Rinaldi, President of NATCA, thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for this very insightful conversation. Thank you as well to our listeners for your participation. As I've mentioned, this report on air traffic control reform was informed by the experts on INO's aviation working group. For more info about the working group or INO in general, please visit our website at inotrans.org or contact us at publicaffairs@inotrans.org. I highly encourage you to subscribe to INO Transportation Weekly, an invaluable resource on all aspects of transportation policy and practice. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.